What's up YouTube, it's Clormo with another Logic Pro X tutorial on my Season 3 Logic Pro X tutorial series. And today I'm going to be talking about source elements overview. So we're going to keep talking about sources for at least 10 more videos. What I intend on doing though is going to try my best to release more than one a week so that we can get through the sources stuff a little bit quicker. And now that I'm not doing the giveaway or any other stuff, then I don't need to be tied and make sure that people understand specific order of videos and stuff tied with dates. So I'll rather just make these as I can and release them as soon as they're done so that we can get a little bit faster progression. Having said that, source elements, I'm just going to give you an overview and then talk specifically about the additive elements. All of this is tied to the type of source that you have, so it's going to be pretty interesting and a common theme that will repeat in these videos. The source that you have will determine what source elements you can use and what parameters you have at your disposal and what sounds you can shape with that. Okay, so without further ado, let's just go right into Logic Pro X. And you will notice first thing that I finally updated. So I have 10.3 now. I hope it's less confusing if I say something that has changed, especially with Alchemy. So I'm gonna just play the same MIDI information that I've been carrying from my Alchemy. It has changed. The track name will keep changing depending on what preset in Alchemy I'm using, but it's just a tubes that have guitar MIDI information. You can search for that in your Apple loops if you want to follow. So let's just listen to that Water Keys preset. Pretty neat sound, right? And just again, just showing what Alchemy can do. So just before I start talking about additive, you're gonna notice that I have just one of the sources selected, A. I could have done B, C, or D, but just as a recap, just remember the global sources tab is just gonna show every source element in the same page or on the same page, and then you're gonna have access to your filters and your master controls. We'll get into those later, right? But each of these will have their own set of controls. We have already covered most, if not all, of this section here. Now we're gonna be jumping to this section here, which is the source, which are the source elements, I should say. And right now you see that I have additive, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in more detail. But you have others available. Keep in mind, the first note is that you're not going to have all of them available at the same time, or you may not have all of them active at the same time, I should say. And that's because, like I said in the beginning, it's all tied to your source, your particular source. And in this case, I chose this preset because the source A has an additive source, right? And in turn is gonna activate the additive tab, which is what we want to cover in detail. We want to cover the additive parameters that we have here, that those element controls for additive. Before I do that though, I just wanted to give you a nicer overview of what source elements are. Each source will have multiple synthesis engines and parameters available. And again, you will use these synthesis methods independently, or like we have here, additive, or you can have a combination of them. It all requires a specific source to activate this. In essence, you're gonna have multiple most of the time when you are importing your own sound, a sample. In this example, I didn't want that to rhyme on purpose, but in this example, I chose the additive source just to keep it on one and try to make it less confusing. But as we go by, I'm gonna be trying different things, right? So that you can see the results of combining more than one source element. Like everything, if you're gonna combine or you're gonna use single source elements, you gotta keep in mind that each one has its own strengths and weaknesses, and they are better suited for a particular sound, and those are things that you will have to learn by yourself. The me explaining different parameters will give you a pretty good idea of what each component, each knob does, and it will give you a good idea of how you can design your sounds and how you can edit your samples. But it really takes practice and studying not only the presets, which are a very good source to start learning how things affect the sounds and your sources, but importing your own and using this as your main sampler, Alchemy as your main sampler, and experimenting and seeing how things get altered and affected, right? So let's start talking about the different elements, and let me stop boring you with my words. So similar to everything else in Alchemy and every other synth, we have opened a new section of the instrument, and with it come different components and different parameters. So it's good to understand and know what each of them do. First of all, the on and off button, it's pretty simple. What that's going to do is just will enable or disable the added element itself, and each different element has a particular way of turning on and off that source element. With this, right, you can turn it on or off. You can see that if I turn off on my particular source A, the additive comes out of there and it just replaces it with a simple saw wave. This is easy to understand in this way, but again, if I had a sample that I had imported that I use, let's say, the additive and spectral, then I could turn off the additive element that I want to use to edit that sample and just keep the spectral. And that's one of the main reasons and one of the main ways to visualize this. If you have a sound source that uses additive, spectral, pitch, granular, or whatever, you can turn the additive element on and off with this button. So that's all it does. It will turn off that portion of the synthesis element that you want to use. Keep in mind, this is just like a synthesis engine that we're dealing with in additive mode, and that's going to be true for all the other elements. Then to the right of that, we have our volume knob, and that's simple. That's just going to set the output level of the added element within the source, and that's going to be relative to the other components if you had any. So at this point, I have it at -3 dB. I can make it anywhere from infinite negative, which will be no output basically, to 0 dB. And this is a very important parameter because if you have multiple elements, you want to make sure that you keep a correct balance of them so that your sound has the correct timbre and the correct form to it based on what you want to achieve. Then we have these 3 elements here, but before I talk about those, I need to skip to design and complex button. And that's very, very simple to understand. You already saw what I did there. If I go to complex, I will have available this shape pop-up menu, and what that's going to do is give me the ability to choose any waveform, any wave shape that I want. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to reload that water keys. Let me just move around. I have the water keys again, so I have the default. See that it's set to a sine wave in the complex mode. But if I go to sine, it's gonna take off one of these parameters and it's gonna eliminate that because I'm just gonna be working with a sine wave. But complex will let you do more than that. And again, each one has its strengths and weaknesses. Sine wave or sine mode will produce the most accurate resynthesis of your original sample if you were working with a sample, right? And it will make it easy to work with the additive effects and forming controls. The complex mode, if you choose any non-sine waveform, and that's why complex by default on this example will have a waveform that's a sine mode. In this case, it's sine mg. You can choose any of these other ones. But if you choose other waveform other than sine, then you're gonna have you could have unusual effects on your sound. That may be a weakness to what you want to do, but it could also be a positive, right? If you want to experiment and reshape your sound in a very dramatic way, if you want to create a very shocking change to a sample right off the bat, you can start with complex. Now, with that, all that I just said, all of this, what it's going to do, it's affect your partials. And I don't think I have talked about partials before in my previous videos. If I have, then my apologies. But if I did, I probably didn't expand upon it too much, or maybe I gave a different analogy. So the analogy I'm going to use today for partials, which is what this here is going to be affecting and all these other parameters is going to be affecting, it's that your partials are something similar to the number of oscillators that you need for a particular sound. Let's say you will need a different number of harmonics or oscillators, in this case because we're synthesizing, for something like a string instrument or a keyboard instrument or a wind instrument. They all have different number of partials that they need to produce that sound. So this is what we're going to be altering here in this portion of the additive engine. We're going to be changing the number, and that's why we have this knob. We can go all the way up to 600. For this particular example, we started with 2 partials. And think about it, that kind of makes sense because we're using a sine wave. So to produce that sound, you have a very good shaped curve, or you should have a curve that has one defined up and down, something of that nature, as opposed to if you had a, say, an electric guitar with an amp or something like that, and your waveform is going to be a little bit more scattered, had a different shape. And you can also obviously choose different complex waves here. You see these metallic ones is something that it's kind of what I'm talking about, and that's gonna require a different number of partials. So I hope that's understood. Alchemy is gonna set automatically the number of partials that it thinks, or that it's pretty sure it will require based on the source that you have. Again, we're using just an additive from a preset, so it's just gonna Alchemy is telling you 2 is enough. But if you're using a sample with various different elements and whatnot, Alchemy is just gonna set that parameter to something different. A good way of testing this, and we'll probably try this later on a future video, it's to clear your preset and bring something like a voice sample from your library and something that's a little bit more high pitched probably, and Alchemy is going to set a number of partials for you, and if you make them below what Alchemy is telling you, it may create some very dramatic changes to it, and you will notice them right away. If you probably turn it up, might not have a any effect at all. And that's because when you have higher notes, you will reach your harmonic limit quicker than when you have lower notes. When you have lower notes, you may affect the partials in one way, but since it's a lower note, you will never reach that limit because the sound itself, the wave, resides on a lower frequency spectrum, so it's not going to reach those higher elements that are going to get lost with the harmonics or the partials that you are trying to add in the synthesis. And wow, that I actually explained that better than I thought with that analogy. Hopefully that is understood. But moving on, to the right we have our PBar, our pitch variation mode. That's very self-explanatory. What you're going to do is just tune all the partials simultaneously. So if I have 2, I'm going to tune both of them at the same time. If I had 600, I'm just going to tune everything. It doesn't distinguish between partial number 1 or harmonic number 1 or oscillator number 1 or oscillator magnitude 1 to oscillator harmonic partial 600. Then to the right of that, we have our sim knob, and that's gonna alter the symmetry. So sim refers to symmetry. And like as I was saying in the example I was giving with a sine wave, you're just gonna alter that symmetry and that shape. So if you have sine waves that have a specific length for that waveform on their first and half to the second half, imagining a normal sine wave, you can alter that symmetry and say, okay, so I want to make the first half shorter and the second half longer, and or you can do it the opposite way. And the effect will be similar if you've turned the knob in either direction, right? But in the end, the important thing here is that you can alter the symmetry of your sine wave in such a form that you're gonna no longer have a sine wave or a pure sine wave, and it's gonna have the same shape, and in turn it's gonna affect the harmonies, and it's gonna make your sound brighter, or etc., depending again on the sound source and the particular wave that you're using, either sine or complex. This at the bottom, it's nothing but our additive element effects, and you're gonna see you have 3 of those available to you. But there's a key difference in these effects. These are not effects in the traditional way that we have used them before, or that we have noted here in Alchemy. They are rather gonna give you ways to control entire groups of partials simultaneously. So again, this is tied to that number partials knobs. So each unit will change that number of partials at the same time as well. And you have 3 groups. So the first group focuses on altering the harmonics. The second group is gonna be dedicated to pitch, and the third group is gonna be dedicated to panning. So a note to make here is that some of the effects are gonna be included only for compatibility with older Alchemy versions. All that means is that you are not able to use or to insert any of those legacy effects in the new version, but if you choose a preset that has the older versions, they're going to load with it. Don't ask me why, but that's something that I wanted to know, just in case that you going through your presets see something that you like and you wanted to use it on a different instance and you're not able to. So you can search a manual to understand that a little bit more in depth. But anyway, so going through this, we have our on and off buttons, and all that's going to do is turn these effects on and off, obviously. So we have some pop-ups, and we can choose what we want to for the first group, right? We can change pure harmonics and use part of the pulse saw. Depending on what you choose is what you have available, and this is just the amount in in the case of pulse saw, this knob is gonna set the mix between pulse and saw wave in this example. But the default for this one is harmonic. Harmonic has your fundamentals knob. Your fundamental knob is gonna set the level of the tone and the partials above it. So if you have it at 0, you will completely remove your fundamental tone. If you set it to 100, then you're gonna hear that in isolation. Higher values tend to make the sound thicker. So this is gonna give you that effect. The octaves, gonna set the level of the fundamental tone and all partials at whole octave intervals above it. So if you have this at 0, you will remove all the harmonics, but you will boost levels of harmonics that are not tied to any of the octaves. That might be a little bit difficult to understand, but trust me, I'm gonna change some of these parameters with the MIDI information that I have, and you're gonna understand that a little bit better. The odd and even knob will set your balance between odd or even harmonics. And again, this is just a type of a mixing. So it's gonna translate again to a balance type of knob. You're just gonna balance the odd and the even. The fifth knob will set the level of the fundamental tone at all partials at fifth intervals, which is at 7 semitones above it. When you make those higher, then you boost harmonics that are at fifth interval. So it's going to be 1, 3, 9, 27, and so on. And it will in turn reduce the levels of the other harmonics. In lower values, we have a reverse effect of that. So that is just with one of the effect methods. You can see how much level of detail and control you have over your source, right? We're all still talking about our source and the harmonics behind it. You can control basically each and every element of your harmonics, from pitch to waveform to the amount of harmonics to the pitch variation, fifths, octaves, the numbers of it, everything. So this is very, very powerful, even though it seems like it's just confusing or time consuming or not worth dealing with. If you want to create your own sound, if you want to create original stuff that you say, okay, I designed this is very important. When we go to the right, we have our pitch harmonic. We also have another pop-up menu, but this here has different, this pop-up menu has different ways of changing our pitch. So if you go to beating, you have what beating does is will allow a group of partials to be detuned to create beating effects. Nothing that difficult to understand. So you have these 3 knobs. You can set the amount of detuning of those partials. Then you can set a group or pattern of partials that you can affect. The tune knob is going to set the range or for the amount knob. So this is like a switch, right? So if I have it, let's see, you can have it on at a certain amount, or it's going to be off. It's all the way over here. And then the amount, if you make it 50%, it's going to be 60% of that tuning amount that you're giving it down here. Nothing much. We were at pitch harm for our default. I'm just going to keep going one by one. After beating, we have stretch. What that's going to do is just going to allow tuning of partials to be stretched up and down. Your stretch knob is gonna stretch the tuning of all the partials simultaneously, and your string knob is gonna stretch the tuning of higher partials more intensely than lower partials. Then we have shift, and shift is a frequency shifter, but it's a very different frequency shifter from what we have seen before. because it's tied to the partials, right? So it's gonna affect and move all the partials up and down in the same amount in hertz, which will break the harmonic relationships between those partials. So that's very interesting. And you have two knobs again. You have your pitch knob, which will set amount of shift for the shifter harmonic, and all of subsequent partials are shifted by the same amount in semitones. The frequency knob is going to define a static shift in hertz. So because the shift does not track the keyboard, then the timbre of the resultant sound changes from note to note. And when this is combined with another harmonic sound, like in the BA section, for example, which we have available, but we're not going to be discussing here, then small shifts can create beating, chorus type effects between the source elements. Then after shift, we have magnet, and magnet allows you to shift the tunings of all partials towards a specified target pitch. So this is going to lead to unusual effects and can result in some transformations of the sound. And this one brings an amount and a pitch knob. The amount knob will specify the amount of pitch shift as a percentage. So 100%, all the partials are set to the pitch that's going to be determined by the pitch knob, which you have to your right. And the pitch knob is just going to set the target pitch. So you can go from 12 semis to 132 semis. So this pitch knob is given in semis, in semitones. Then lastly, to the right, we have our pan parameters. From your pop-up menu, you have two main and then one that's gonna be like a combo. The first one is spread. Spread modulates the pan positions of all the partials to create kind of a stereo effect. And your partials are gonna be pan left to right in a regular pattern, so it's going to be spread evenly. The amount is going to set the depth of that stereo panning effect. Your rate knob is going to set the speed. The ramp knob is going to set the panning amount for lower partials, so this can create a subtle widening of the sound, which is going to in turn make less obvious that left to right movement on the lower partials. Your cycles knob sets phase differences between the partials. At 0, all partials are in phase. At higher values, this will lead to a finer, more subtle and complex effect. And your auto pan has the same options and they work on the same way, but what it's going to do is going to modulate the pan positions of all partials from left to right in a regular pattern. So it's not gonna create that type of stereo effect that you will have with spread mode. And with that, I have explained this section here. You notice that although it looked in the beginning like, okay, we have a few knobs here that should be easy to understand, it is kind of easy to understand if you keep in mind that all depends on the source and the concept of partials, which is key in this section here. It's your harmonics and your oscillators, how you can control all of those and how you can tie them to pitch and all these other effect types that we have seen in other synths. With that all being explained, I'm just gonna play around with some of these knobs, playing the elements here so we can close the tutorial with at least some sound behind it as opposed to just me speaking. So let's start playing that. I'm probably gonna turn the volume a little bit, the main, just so that we can concentrate on. See, I'm seeing here my same MIDI information that I have in real time. So let's see, I'm not gonna change the sine wave, but I'm gonna up the number of partial. It's clipping, so I'm gonna turn that down a little bit. See how in the spectrogram that affects there's a very noticeable difference just with the number of partials. Set that variation a little bit higher. Let's change the symmetry, even though that we're just having a regular sine wave at this point. Like I said, it's not gonna have a key distinctive effect because this is quite high pitched. Let's see, let's go, let's give it a harmonic. So what I'm doing here is trying to change that pitch and that tonality. You see that as soon as I started playing with those, my warmth on the sound changed. Now instead of magnet, let me use a beating effect. If I stretch, the beating, it's very I think recognizable. Change the partial groups, so I'm changing more of all these partials that I'm seeing here. See, if as soon as I used an odd number, creates an odd sound. Let's change that panning with a, let's see, yeah, let's use a spread. And that was just a quick way of showing what those parameters do. So, and with that, I'm gonna leave you for this tutorial. In the next video, we're gonna be talking about spectral element controls. And bear in mind that these are a little bit longer videos, even though I'm trying to make them shorter. I don't wanna go just quickly over the settings and the parameters. I wanna really do some examples, you know, real time, and show you how those effects that you are, or those results, relate to what we have just said, right? How if I'm telling you this is gonna shape the sound this way, that you actually get to hear it and then go out and try yourself. Okay, so see you in the next video. Thanks for everything. Thanks to the new subscribers and the likes and shares that I've gotten recently. As I said, I'll try to put out these set of next videos quicker out there, and that way we can jump over the source topics and concentrate on some of the other areas that we still have to cover for Alchemy. As usual, if you want to find me and my work in other venues and social media, you can check the graphic that's down here. There's a no look coming in March, so pay attention to that. Thanks for watching YouTube. Peace out.